Souls-like games have a very interesting history. The term Souls-like is so vague that nobody can say definitively what a Souls-like game is. Is it a stamina-based combat, difficult but fair challenges, or being set in a ruined kingdom? Nobody knows for sure. And let's just say that there is a lot of them. Over 1,300 in fact. And because of that, a lot of them are pretty bad. Now that's not to say that there are no good Souls-likes, that would be a lie. I mean, here are some examples of good Souls-like games. But for every good Souls-like game, there is like 10 more that are underwhelming. And what sucks is that in some of them you can clearly see a game that can be excellent but is for whatever reason filled with questionable design choices. Which is something I can't say for this one. Released in August 2021, it is not only one of my favorite Metroidvanias ever, but also a great example of how to make a great Souls-like. The game I'm talking about is called Grime. You might have heard of this game already from different content creators. Most prominent would be Iron Pineapple and Indie Mouse, and currently it has around 2800 reviews on Steam. So it isn't that of an underrated game as some other indie games that only have around 500 reviews, yet I feel like not too many people talk about this game as much as they should. A lot of people probably looked at this game and thought, just another game that looks like Dark Souls. The way I see Grime is that it is a prime example of how you can make not only a good Souls-like game, but also a fantastic game that can stand on its own. With the market filled with so many Metroidvanias and Souls-likes, it is important to make yourself stand out on your own while also being a fun game to play. And Grime manages to achieve this. It has a vision and sticks to that vision from beginning to end, with few hiccups here and there, but still manages to be a consistent experience throughout your playtime. But let's get more specific. Let's talk about the world and atmosphere. In Grime, you play as this humanoid entity that goes by different names, like Akland or Chiseled One, who was formed deep in the bottom of a cave and has a black hole for a head. Now you must find what your purpose is while also facing different kinds of monstrosities in this world. Grime is a 2.5D Metroidvania, which already sets it apart from different Metroidvanias. Most of the Metroidvanias I've played are done in 2D art or pixel art. 3D is very rarely used for these kinds of games. The only exception is of course Metroid, Dread to be more specific. Of course, there are other games besides Metroid that use 3D art instead of 2D for a Metroidvania. But a lot of indie developers tend to use just pixel art or 2D hand-drawn art. With 3D art, developers must be very careful when choosing the right color palette and making the lighting look good, because if the lighting is bad, it can break the immersion of your experience while playing that game. So going into it, I was a bit hesitant with the 3D art, but decided to give it a chance. And Grime not only manages to make 3D art fit for this kind of game, but also stands out to have its own identity rather than just being a 3D game that should be in pixel art. Grime takes the advantages of 3D art to its fullest potential, making this world stand out that much more. To say the least, Grime's world is very unique looking. Like in the first area, Weeping Cavity, lighting is done so well, making it feel like you're in a cave, while also having some interesting background designs, like these eyes constantly watching you. And as you go further into the game, the visuals become more and more surreal. From the creepiness in Feaster's lair with teeth growing from places where they shouldn't be, to the nerve root being a giant nerve tissue, to the beautiness of Karen's palace, or flowers that have teeth, and sometimes eyes. The atmosphere is very thick and makes you immersed into exploring this strange looking world. Even the areas that aren't that filled with details like Lithic still manage to be excellent with its deliberate color palette choice. Every single area is distinct in the color palette, the lighting, the theming of each area, it is all great. This doesn't only apply to the backgrounds and foregrounds. The enemy designs in terms of looks are some of the most unique I've seen in a video game. From the unnerving creature designs in the Feaster's lair area, to the animal-like enemies with jaws trying to grab you, or this enemy with its long tongue while holding his eyes using them as a weapon. The designers went all out on creating these fascinating enemy designs. You still get some typical humanoid enemies, but you always get some variations of them throughout the game to not make them look bland. With its excellent use of lighting and color palette to the amazing area and creature designs, Grime does a fantastic job at making you want to explore this unsettling yet beautiful world at times. Another thing that Grime nails is how good combat feels. On surface, it might seem like just a Dark Souls combat, but in 2.5D. You got stamina bar, you can attack, dodge has iframes, you can level up your stats, you get the idea. So while the combat is very similar to Dark Souls, Grime does put a ton of effort into making this combat feel good. Grime's combat system is all about being defensive, and a big central gimmick in that system is parrying. When you parry enemies in Grime, you can instantly kill them. Enemies that have red bars will instantly die to parrying, but enemies that have grey bars cannot be killed with parrying. You will only just repel their attacks, so you must use your weapon in order to take them down. And sometimes you'll have enemies where they'll have health bars that look like this, where you must use your weapon and parry the red portions of their health. It is very dynamic and engaging system, where you have to attack, parry and dodge through the attacks that you cannot parry while also worrying about your stamina so that you don't run out of it. But what makes parrying in this game so important is that it is tied to the healing system. In order to be able to heal, you must fill this bar on the left. You must parry a certain number of enemies in order to fully fill up this bar so that you can heal yourself. This is a genius system because it makes parrying very important if you want to be able to heal, but you still have attacks that you are forced to either dodge through or run away from. If you try to be extremely aggressive against other enemies, you are going to die. Grime heavily rewards the defensive playstyle instead of a more aggressive playstyle. The combat also gets more interesting once you unlock the pull ability. You might think it is only used to pull certain platforms so that you can get to the next destination, however you can also use it against other enemies. When a golden aura appears around the enemy that you are fighting, you can pull them down to stop them from using some deadly attacks, allowing you to deal as much damage as possible to them. The combat system in 2D action games, or even in 3D ones, can feel undercooked at times, whether it is the lack of enemy variety, or the systems that don't need to be there, or are extremely annoying. And none of those things apply to Grime. The game's combat has a vision and fully explores that vision without adding any annoying mechanics that can ruin the game. I also really appreciate the amount of platforming this game has. Platforming is often an overlooked part in Metroidvanias, so it really makes me happy that this game also has some platforming elements. But there is one problem. This game has fall damage. If you've seen my Salt and Sacrifice video, you know how much I hate clunky platforming that can lead to your demise. While I do think that it is kind of dumb to have fall damage, the platforming is ton of fun and really responsive. Also, I need to say this. Thank God that falling from high cliffs doesn't instantly kill you. I get it, there needs to be some kind of punishment from falling off a high platform, but often it results in so much frustration. In Grime, even though you will lose more health, the game will still give you a couple of tries before you die. Grime also has a bestiary in the game with an interesting twist. Absorbing a certain amount of a specific enemy will complete the prey hunt for that enemy and you are able to unlock some passive skills. To get those skills, you need to have hunt points that you get from killing some special enemies in the game. Some of the skills are simply just boring number changes, like this one, but you still have some pretty unique ones, like this one. And this system encourages experimentations with skills that you want to use. The bosses in Grime are without a doubt a highlight in this game. You have standard mini-bosses that once you kill them, they'll increase your bar for healing, allowing you to heal multiple times. Mini-bosses are hit or miss sometimes. They're not awfully designed, rather they are used later as a regular enemy or are artisan of flesh. In other words, easy. Jaw Stag and Jaw Crab are definitely the best out of them all, especially Jaw Crab, where you have to parry both claws so that you are able to deal damage to him with your weapon. Main bosses, on the other hand, are fantastic. There is not a single main boss that I dislike. Amalgam is an excellent first boss that will teach the player of managing their stamina and parrying the attacks in order to be able to heal. Whispering Mothers forces you to pay attention to both mothers and avoid their rocks that they love to throw at you. More rewarding if you absorb the rocks to throw them back. And killing one will make the other frantic and aggressive. Flower Heart is a bit of a gimmick fight, where you must deal as much damage as possible to the flower while avoiding a rock beast that will constantly charge at you, then adds the second beast halfway through the fight. Vulture is a very tense fight, where you must avoid his shockwaves, slams, spitting out poison, and the attack where you must pull the rock from the ground in order to block his deadly laser. And the second phase is incredible, where now you must kill the parasites that are constantly attacking you while also paying attention to the vulture. And then we have Shapely Fidus, who is the best main game boss. Shapely is a real roadblocker for many players and truly tests your reaction timing and finding the right opportunities to heal or deal damage to her. Shapely's combos also vary from just slams to full extended combos, setting the floor on fire and sending this red circle that you must dodge through, not to mention her second phase where she becomes more aggressive. I also like her more than the previous bosses because you are able to take the advantage of almost every attack she dishes out, like repelling her attacks 2 times in a row, then pulling her down will make her vulnerable to attacks. Shapely's third phase is more of a survive for this long without dying, but still thematically appropriate for this boss. Now I want to talk about the final boss in Grime. But this is some serious spoiler territory, so skip to this timestamp if you don't want to get spoiled. The final boss of Grime is Shidra of the World Pillar, and if I were to make the list of my favorite bosses of all time, he would be on it, no doubt about it. Shidra is a brilliantly crafted fight that tests everything you learned up to that point. Everything from dodging, to parrying, to positioning, to using your pull ability, double jumping over certain moves. Shidra has the highest numbers of attacks that he can dish out at the player, and all of them require a very specific way to deal with them and never feels unfair. And what I love about this boss is that with every single attack that he can use, you can use it to your advantage. For example, he has this attack where he will use two orbs that will send a shockwave that needs to be dashed through, and after that he will throw them on the ground. But one of the orbs is yellow, and you can throw it back at Shidra for insane amount of damage. Halfway through the fight, he will summon two minions to attack you while he heals himself until you destroy these two minions. Normally this would be kind of lazy to just throw some ads to distract you from the boss, but this part of the phase is important because pairing them will allow you to fill up your healing. Once you take Shidra's health bar down, phase 2 will start. It's just climbing up to the next phase, similar to something like the final boss of Hollow Knight. And phase 3 is really easy since you just have to absorb his arms and that's it. But it is appropriate for the final phase to be the easiest because of how insane the first phase is. Combining this with his excellent soundtrack and story reasons as to why he is fighting you, Shidra is a perfect final challenge to face against. Now there are still a couple of bosses that I haven't mentioned, but just know they are also spectacular. I also want to briefly talk about the music, since a good soundtrack can enhance the experience of any game. Luckily, Grime also hits this mark too. The environmental tracks are all fantastic and very fitting for each area. For example, the Feaster's Lair soundtrack really makes you feel unnerved as you are going through this creepy area. While something like Carven's Palace really makes it look like you are going through a gorgeous yet dangerous place. The soundtracks for bosses are also great, although most of them sound a bit like a generic Dark Souls soundtrack. The most standout for me is Shapely Fidus' theme, where the music will start calmly, but as the fight goes on, it will become more and more tense. Very fitting since Shapely will start doing everything in her power to stop you. Also, the new DLC boss, the Surrogate Vulture, has an absolutely amazing soundtrack. Have you ever played a certain game, thought it was enjoyable somewhat, but felt like it could have been so much better? Many games that I've played have fallen into that category, where I could see a big potential in it, but it is unfortunately filled with some questionable design choices, especially with Souls-likes and Metroidvanias. But Grime isn't one of those games. It is an excellent Metroidvania with great combat system, fantastic use of parrying, memorable and fun bosses, and the game is visually incredible. There are many Metroidvanias that people talk highly about. Hollow Knight, Super Metroid, Castlevania games, Ender Lilies, Blasphemous, and many other games that I haven't mentioned are all great examples of how good Metroidvania games can be. And I do think that Grime falls into that category. The game is not only an excellent Metroidvania, but also the best Souls-like I've ever played.